Okay, cool. All right. Okay. So new time, better time, I guess, hopefully. We're gonna go backwards a little bit by um, a couple of paragraphs. It's been a few weeks. We had gotten up to paragraph ches, paragraph 8, but we're going to go backwards a little bit. We're going to go back to paragraph 6, vav, just to kind of stick with to get back into the flow of the idea that he's working with right now. Okay, the where we are right now is the idea where he ended off for right now, rather, is the idea that he ended off in paragraph hey, that we should all understand that everything is the opposite from what it appears on the surface, right? That in truth, all of the deficiencies and all of the problems and all of the deficits and issues that we have, by necessity, we have to conclude that they're actually good, fantastic, and sort of part of the unfolding process that's supposed to take things to where they're supposed to go. There's a purpose to them. The tailor is making the clothes, and the tailor is perfect, and therefore the clothes by definition are perfect. And any impressions, negative impressions we have are only because we're like looking at things halfway through the process or partway through the process, without really looking at them in light of where they're supposed to get us to and how to understand how they get us there. Okay, so that was just to respond. He brought that in to respond just to a few of his original questions about how could imperfection come from perfection and how can deficiency come from shleimus and so on. Now, in paragraph 6, he's going to move on to, well, really in paragraph 7, but in paragraph 6, he's going to now start setting up for us an understanding of how it all works. So he says in paragraph 6, Vikvar haranu Chazal. Chazal, really, Marachu Rav Chaim Vital here has told us in the beginning of Eitz Chaim, Shelo bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu es ha'olam ela b'chdei lahanos l'nivrav, that the reason for creation, the reason why there's a movement from the Or Ein Sof to then generate Tzimtzum, to then generate creation after that, why doesn't it just stay the way it was in the totally static nitzli, right, eternal state of Or Ein Sof, which is just static and perfect and bishlemus and so on? Why is something prompting any change? All of that is ela b'chdei lahanos l'nivrav. It's all there in order to provide benefit, joy, pleasure, enjoyment to others, as an expression of the idea of chok hatov lahetiv, ratzon hakadosh baruch hu lahetiv l'nivrav, that is built into the reality of the Or Ein Sof. It's not built into the reality, we talked about this way back, it's not built into the reality of the Ein Sof itself, Atzmuso Hanelam, right? The incomprehensible, untouchable reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu itself. But the Or Ein Sof is just a small expression of the totality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And within the reality of the Or Ein Sof, the way it exists, and for whatever reasons that it exists, right? Shtok kach ala b'ratzon lefanai. We don't know why the Or Ein Sof is this way, but within the system of the Or Ein Sof, which is the final turtle that we can have access to, if there's turtles all the way down, that's our last turtle. And within that universe, within that reality, there's this necessary principle, and we could, talk about proof text to this, or we could talk about the logic of it and the philosophy of it, but chol katov lahetiv, ratzon hakadosh baruch hu lahetiv l'nivrav. Again, that is not an inherent quality or a necessary quality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu atzmuso yisparach, of the essence of God itself. There are no necessary qualities of God itself, but the emanation of God, the extension or the expression of the Ratzon of God, that is the Or Ein Sof, within that, there can be rules, there can be necessities. And one of those necessities is chol katov lahetiv, is Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahetiv l'nivrav, is the idea that for whatever reason, the Ein Sof wanted the Or Ein Sof to create a reality or to coexist within a reality that already is defined by this rule, by this principle. That is how we conceptualize the eternal and God. And this is the point where we have to focus our eyes and all of our thoughts. This idea of everything is created lahanos l'nivrav. This is both the intent, right, the prompt for creation, and is also the tachlis, the purpose of creation. V'yesh lehisbonin. And we also need to understand that because the idea, the thought, the intent behind the Bria, behind creation, was to provide enjoyment to created beings, to created things, to creation itself. It's necessary, therefore, Shabara benishamos midas ratzon gdola ad ma'od lekabel es asher chashav litein lahen. Therefore, it's necessary that within this creation, creation has to be defined by this will to receive that's implanted within the shamos, a midas ratzon gedola ad ma'od lekabel, a very great, a very powerful, a very large and unfillable ratzon lekabel, to receive what it is that God intends to give. Shahare midas gadlo shall kol ta'anuk v'chol hana meduda b'midas gadlo shall haratzon l'kabel. So, because all goodness is only measured in proportion to, or is only experienced in proportion to, the desire for that goodness. We talked about this many times. You can hand me the best thing in the world. If I don't want that thing, then it's not good for me. I don't enjoy that thing. You can give me whatever kind of the best food in the world. If I'm not hungry, there's no enjoyment in the food. A gift, money, salary, job, whatever it happens to be, if I don't want that thing, then there's nothing in it for me to have that thing. And there's no enjoyment in the having of that thing. So if the purpose of creation is lehetiv l'nivrav, lahanos l'nivrav, then by necessity, in order for the nivraim to experience hanan, to experience goodness and to experience pleasure, there has to be created within the bria. The only necessary thing to exist within the bria, as he's going to say, is this ratzon l'kabel, is a desire to receive what it is that's going to be given. What is being given? God Himself, the hashpa, the shefa of God itself is what is being given, because that's the only. Nothing else is being created other than a ratzon l'kabel, but there has to be a ratzon l'kabel to receive that thing, and that's what's being created, and it's necessary that that thing exists. Ashkol haratzon l'kabel gadol yoser hine b'shir hazeh midas hatayna gedola b'yoser v'chol haratzon l'kabel pachos yoser harei ba'oso amida nifchas shir hatayna me'akabel. And thus, the greater the will to receive, the greater the desire to receive, the greater the enjoyment that can be had from the receiving, and the smaller the desire to receive. If I only want something a little bit, so the less I enjoy the thing that I'm getting when I get it. This is the critical line of this paragraph. There are many critical lines of this paragraph, but this is very critical, right? Therefore, it's necessary. It's a necessary reality of creation. It was necessary within the limited reality of Or Ein Sof and down, right? Not within God itself, but within the expression of the reality that God, for whatever reason God wanted to created. Within that reality, it's necessary that there is a ratzon l'kabel within all nivraim, within the neshamos of all the nivraim, and it has to be a very powerful ratzon l'kabel. Hamatayim lemidas hatayna gagadol shekol yachuso chashav l'aneg es haneshamos. It has to be a very, very powerful ratzon l'kabel that's equivalent to the powerful tainug that's waiting to be given, right? There's a lot of good being given, or there's a lot of tainug, endless tainug, really ein sofios of tainug that is being offered. And if the Or Ein Sof is defined by a ratzon lahashbos is a desire lahanos lenivroev, by definition, that is a limitless desire. That's a limitless ratzon. If it's a limitless ratzon, there's also has to be a corresponding limitless ratzon lakabel created to receive that potentially limitless hashbah. Because the enjoyment and the ratzon lakabel, they rise on the same tide. They have to be proportionate to each other. If they're not proportionate to each other, then there's going to be a misalignment between the ratzon lahashbos that exists within the Or Ein Sof and the kabbalah and the experience of the hana that's going to exist within the bria, and that's not going to work. That would imply then that there's an imperfection within God or within the Ratzon Hashem to give goodness to us, right? As if I want to give the ultimate goodness to you, but I can't give the ultimate goodness to you because there's not enough Ratzon Lakabel to receive ultimate, unlimited, limitless goodness. And therefore, the Ratzon Lakabel has to be equivalent or has to be proportionate to the Ratzon Lahashbos. The Ratzon Lahashbos is infinite. The Ratzon Lakabel is going to have to be infinite. Okay, at least in potential. At least in potential, at least in the ultimate sense. Fine. And now that we know this, now that we know this, now we're able to understand the second chakira that we raised earlier on in paragraph base. Because we want Now we can try to explain what it was that was created. What is it that exists in our world that didn't already exist in God itself, such that we have a bria, right? Meaning there's a difference between before and after. Before creation and after creation, there's a base. Bereshit starts with a base. We all know the famous medrash. The Bereshit starts with the base because you don't ask what happened before the base. It's a closed letter. It's closed on the back side, and it opens up and everything pours out of the base from the base and onward. But before the base, it's different. Something changes with the Bria. There's a distinction between the before and the after. And in order for there to be a distinction between the before and the after, there has to be something in the after that wasn't present in the before. And the Chakira was, well, what is that thing? What possibly could be that thing if by definition, God is Ein Sof and God is Hakol Yachol and everything is there? What is not there, or what couldn't be there that is now here, such that now there's a Bria, and before there wasn't a Bria, before there was just Or Ein Sof, and now there's Bria. What was that thing? Va'ata sheyadanu b'bir shemachshavas habriya shehi b'chtei lahanos l'nivra bara b'hechrach midas ratzon l'kabel mimenu yisbarach es kol hanoam ba'atov hazeh shel chashav ba'adam. Now that we know that built into the intent and the purpose of the Bria was a desire to give goodness to the Nivra, and that desire to give goodness and endless joy and endless contentment and endless hana to the Nivraim necessitates the existence of a corresponding proportionate Ratzon Lakabel to exist within the Nivraim in order to receive all of that goodness and actually enjoy it. Hine, haratzon lakabel hazeh vaday shelo hayakol ba'atzmus yisbarach mikarem shebar b'neshamos. This ratzon lakabel, this is the thing that doesn't exist ba'atzmus yisbarach prior to being created in the neshamos of Nivraim. Kimi miyakabel, because it's nonsensical to say that God has a ratzon lakabel. Who would God receive from? Right? So now this is the new thing This is the new thing that wasn't present within Atzmusa Yisbarach itself before. Okay, now I want to pause for a second and just add a caveat here. We have to add so many caveats all the time, but we have to add a caveat here, and that is, in a certain sense, this doesn't really answer our question, or at least the chakira. It doesn't really explain the chakira. I don't understand, right? I don't understand. If you're telling me that God is everything and God is Ein Sof and God is Hakol Yachal and everything is Nichlal Bo, if that's true, then how is it indeed that there is a Ratzon Lakabel that doesn't exist within God prior to it being created, and now there's this thing that exists outside of God, that apart from God, new and separate from God? What does that even mean? He's not so much his answer here doesn't so much as solve or answer the Chakira. It just pushes the question back. I think it pushes the question back one step. Okay, so I don't understand. You're telling you asked, the question was, how can something new, what was the new thing that existed? Because how can something new exist? Because everything already existed within God. So what are you talking about? And now we're back to, oh, something new existed, and here's the new thing that existed. It's a Ratzon Lakabel that didn't exist within God. Because how could it exist within God? So then you just changed your definition of God that you used as your premise for your question. Because now apparently God doesn't need to include everything. God doesn't include Ratzon Lakabel. So
it doesn't seem that contradictory to me. The bottom line is what is the concept of biblical is why there's a separation from God. How can God do something supposed to create a space between him and us? And then once there's a space, obviously the space is a need. So how do you create a space?
say that again. I didn't follow.
I mean, once you have a separate being space between God and the rest, then you obviously can create the ability of that space creating a need. But how God creates a space, and it doesn't explain how it can be consumed in the first place. That's what I don't understand.
So but that space in and of itself is the question. If the space was present within God originally, then why is the existence of that space something different that distinguishes between Or Ein Sof and Bria after Tzimtzum? And if that space wasn't present within God prior to, then God's not God. God is limited.
I want to make sure that I'm understanding your Kushiana Schlag here. It sounds like to a Schlag, nothing is not the same thing as something. That this vacuum perhaps troubles him less because it's not positive. It's an absence of some sort, and it sounds like you're saying, I don't buy that. The difference between matter and antimatter is perhaps overrated from a cosmic divine perspective. Is that how you're reading this?
I guess you went over my head with the matter antimatter part, but absence is a different form of presence, meaning absence is also something. Absence is a created thing, right? Or emptiness or Ratzon Lakabel or lack or what. If that's a thing, how does it not already exist within God prior to the Bria? I'm saying all of this. Maybe I'm just barking up the wrong tree, and this is silly. I'm saying all of this only to reinforce once again that we're constantly going to hit a wall. I think the wall between Or Ein Sof and the thing that came before it. The thing that came before it certainly includes everything. Has to, in a way that we can't comprehend and has to be paradoxical and beyond comprehension. And that's the definition of the thing that's beyond Or Ein Sof. Atzmusu Yisbarach, Atzmusu Anelam, in it completely and totally inaccessible. Can't talk about it, there's nothing to say. But what he's setting up for us is that the Or Ein Sof lacks a Ratzon L'Kabel. Okay. Atzmusa Yisbarach, the actual reality, he uses the terminology a little bit differently, but the actual reality of godliness doesn't lack anything. It can't lack anything. We're all just hu makomo shel olam. Everything here is playing out within the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the atzmos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so everything here is already there. When everything we talk about is at a level below God. I just think that's an important thing to constantly reinforce here. One of the dangers of all Kabbalah, the Kabbalah warn about this, in every Hakdama that there is always the danger of Hagshama, of taking, especially within the systems of the Arizal, but in other places also, there's always a danger of Hagshama. I can draw charts and I can map things out, and so on and so forth. And I begin to think that there are tangible material realities that we're talking about here. And it's critical to appreciate, not that that's a problem necessarily. I think that the Arizal is actually pretty clear in many places that, no, the Torah talks to us that way. We can talk that way. But we're not talking about God. Right? We're talking about sub-God, something below God, still an expression of the Ratzon Hashem, and still a very, very, very high and incomprehensible expression of the Ratzon Hashem. The Or Ein Sof is also incomprehensible. But even then, there's more incomprehensibility beyond the Or Ein Sof, because the Or Ein Sof still has definitions, qualities, characteristics, and so on and so forth that we use words to talk about. So we should just draw that distinction. The Leshem sets us up in a slightly different way, which is interesting. Let's see if I can. I think it's worth saying, because it has some important points to it that are generally more important. The Leshem talks about how every expression of Or, every expression of Ratzon. This is rooted in the Rashash, and I mean, it's rooted in the Arizal really also, but every expression of Ratzon, every expression of Or is prompted by a lack. Right? Every new thing, every expression of anything, any new creation or any new hashpa is born of a lack that generates a need, that generates a zivug with a giving source that can fill that need. When the need is filled, it generates a whole new reality, because now lack plus filling that lack creates a whole new thing than you had before. And that is what generates everything, stage by stage by stage by stage. But the Leshem, based on this, asks a very simple question, which is, okay, so you're telling me, really, in more Kabbalistic terminology, what you're telling me is that in order to generate anything, there's a Bechinas Nukva, there's a feminine aspect, a Malchus, a Ratzon L'Kabel, right, a receptive Kli that is not yet fulfilled, and the receptive Kli wants to be fulfilled and reaches out to the Bechinas Duchra, to the masculine element, the Zer Anpin, the Chachma, whatever it happens to be, depending on the kind of zivug we're talking about, and the two meet, and a zivug happens, and the zivug bears offspring, which is a new reality. And the Leshem says, okay, but how did those things come into existence, right? So the masculine property there that's going to give to the feminine property, and the feminine property, those are both created things that had to have come from somewhere. So each of those are a new existence at one point, right? They came into existence. They must have come into existence through a higher level or a prior, so to speak. We're not talking about time now, but a prior, conceptually, a prior zivug between a masculine and feminine element. And those masculine and feminine elements must have come from somewhere, and each of them must have come from a zivug of a masculine and feminine element. And the Leshem says, so what are we talking about? And so, and he ultimately falls back on at some point, there's Ritzono Hanela that generates these things. We are talking as high as we go in these kinds of, as many levels up as we want to go in these kinds of statements. We're still speaking within the framework of creation and the framework of male, female create new entity, and then new entities go and create other new entities in male, female couplings and so on and so forth. All of that only operates within our reality. But our reality comes into existence in a way that we have nothing to say about. It happened. It's here. We're in it. We can look at it. We can describe it. We can identify it. We can contemplate it. So it's here. How it came to be ultimately is inexplicable. It doesn't follow the same rules as then exist within the system. Okay? So I'm just... that's at play over here as well, I think, and it's important to say. It's important to say. We know nothing about God. All we know is what we, at various levels of assessment and comprehension, are trying to absorb, or trying to see, or trying to understand. But we know nothing about God, and none of this is about God.
I don't know, but basically, how I'm interpreting it, we don't understand creation, nor do we understand the difference between God before and God after creation.
It depends what you call creation and what you call God, right? Meaning, I think that, no, but that's important. Meaning, when my daughter was born, that was creation. Bereshis, the base of Bereshis is creation.
I'm talking about the initial creation, God's creation.
So right, so but there are things we do understand. Meaning, we have Asara Mamaros that we do have some comprehension of, and then we have a Maimer Sasum that we have no comprehension of. And then but even the Maimer Sasum is part of is the base of Bereshis, although we have no comprehension of it, because there's no Vayomer Elokim, there's nothing to latch onto, but something is happening, something has to be said in order to start the Bereshis, right? And so there's a Maimer Sasum that takes place. We know it's, know what it is, but we know it had to have happened. And there's stuff even before that happens too. Before the thing we can't identify, there's also stuff. Okay. V'yachidim zeh. Muvan al pi machshavas habriya shelo hayatzarach klal livro mashu yosem me'aratzon l'kabel hazeh. Now, together with this, we can understand that based on the machshavas habriya, the purpose of creation, the kavana behind creation, nothing was necessary, nothing had to be created other than the ratzon l'kabel. Shahare, bria mechudeshes hazu, kvar maspekes lo, yisbarach lamalos kol machshavas habriya shechashav aleinu lahanas osanu. Because with just this new bria, the ratzon l'kabel, God now, so to speak, has everything God needs to do what God wants. All God wants is lahanos lenivrav. The hana, the giving, the hativ, the hatava, the hashpa is already there. So all that's missing is a ratzon l'kabel so that it can be enjoyed, because it's already being given. So I need to catch. There just needs to be the catch that like I want to catch it. And once that's done, the machshavas habriya has been fulfilled. Everything to fulfill the machshavas habriya is there. Nothing more needs to happen, and therefore nothing more does happen. Nothing really different or new happens. Yesh me'ayin, there's one yesh me'ayin, ratzon l'kabel. Everything else is yesh me'yesh. Once there's a ratzon l'kabel, everything else is already, everything is here. Everything we need. A ratzon l'hashvos and a ratzon l'kabel, that's all you need to achieve lahetiv l'nivra. We're done. That's the sum total of all creation. אבל כל המילוי שבמחשבת הבריאה, דהיינו כל מיני הטבה שחשה בעדנו, כבר הן נמשכות בהמשך ישר מעצמוס יתברך, ואין לו עניין לברוא אותם מחדש בעת שכבר הן נמשכות יש מיש, אל הרצון לקבל הגדול שבנשמות. So, the only thing that needed to be created was the ratzon lakabel. The filling, the fulfillment, the completion of the intent behind creation, which is the goodness and the tainug and the hana and so on and so forth, all of that itself follows and flows from God itself. God is the good. The good is already going. All you need is a ratzon lakabel. Once I have a ratzon lakabel, filling the ratzon lakabel and the experience of tainug and hana, that is the machshava behind creation, the kavanah behind creation, that happens by default. But everything else is just a hamshacha yeshara me'atzmusa yisparach. Ve'ein lo inyan livro osam mechadash be'ez shekbar hein nimshachas yesh miyesh el ratzon lakabel agadol shem neshamos. None of these things need to be created. Enjoyment doesn't need to be created. Shefa doesn't need to be created. All the things that give us enjoyment don't need to be created. Those are elokus, just extensions of elokus. Vine nisbar lanu behechlet shekol hachomer kulo mitchilaso ad sofo shebebria hamechudeshes hu rak haratzon lakabel. And so we now see very clearly and absolutely that the entire form of creation, the entire form of everything, the chomer of everything, the mold of everything, from the very, very beginning of Bria until the very, very end of the Bria, which is the fulfillment of the tachlis of Lehetiv Lenevrav, all of it is just Ratzon Lakabel. The only novel thing that exists within all of that, that's different and separate and not already included within the highest level of godliness that we can access, comprehend, relate to in any way, shape, or form, is just the Ratzon Lakabel. Everything else is just godliness. It has to be that way. The Baal HaSulam talks about this also in his parish on Eitz Chaim, and he frames it. I'll read it I'll read it because it's worth reading. In his parish on Eitz Chaim, he says as follows. He wants to explain. He's coming to explain the idea that, right? The Arizal opens up the beginning of Eitz Chaim. He says, "Da." Before anything, there was an elevated, simple, straightforward, uncomplicated, undifferentiated light, a ratzon, that filled all reality. There was at that time, so to speak, at that time or in that reality, there was no empty space in the sense of empty air or chalal or void. Everything was filled with this or Ein Sof. So Rav Ashlag in his parish here, he comes along and wants to explain the idea of a chalal. What is a chalal? Chalal is what happens as a result of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum opens up a chalal. Before tzimtzum, when there's just Or Ein Sof, the Arizal tells us specifically there is no chalal. What is this? Kedei lahasbir hamila hazos, he says, in order to explain this term, chalal, sar sheteda mekodem mahu mahuso shel kli ruchani. In order to understand this term, we have to understand what a kli ruchani is. I know what a kli gashmi is. I know what a physical kli is, a cup, right? An object that holds things, or an object that is used to do things, right? It's a means. A means, something that serves a purpose. It's not an end in and of itself. It serves a further end. right? The purpose of a cup is not to be a cup. The purpose of a cup is to hold the water. The purpose of a hammer is to hit nails. Vuhu, what is the essence, what is the mahus of a kli ruchani? He says, Vuhu ki biyos hanetzal mekabelas shefach yuso min amatzil. Hine behechrach sheyesh lo ratzon v'shtokus lekabelas shefa ze mimenu yisparach. Since every netzal, since every created thing, every expression receives its existence through the receiving shefa chiuso min amatzil, it receives its life force, it receives its definition, it receives its reality and existence from the expressor, from God. It has to be that it has a ratzon and a desire and a yearning to receive it. V'teda, asher midas haratzon eshtokus hazu hi klalos kol hachomer shebenetzal. This ratzon lakabel, this hishtokus, this yearning for receiving the thing, it's receiving my own life force, right? Receiving my own shefach yuso. That is klalos kol hachomer shebenetzal. That's the entire form, structure, definition, framework of all expressed created things. Ba'ofen shekol ma sheyesh benetzal zula zeh hachomer, in a way, in a sense, that everything that is with respect to every created thing, aside from this form of ratzon lakabel, of hishtokukus, of yearning, of needing, of chisaron, of chalal, kavar eno miyuchas lebechinas hachomer shelo, elo lebechinas hashefa shelo shemakabel min amatzil. By default, what this means is that everything that is me, aside from the framework of a yearning and a desire to receive meanness, for me to exist, everything aside from that is not me. It's not my form. It's my essence. It's the shefa that comes directly and that I receive directly from the matzil itself. V'lo od, ela shahachomer hazeh hu hamoded es gadluso v'shir tomaso shel kol hanetzal. And this chomer, this ratzon lakabel, depending on what it looks like and what it is desiring, what it's wanting, what the definition of that, right? So, I want an apple or I want an orange. Well, if I want an apple, I'm now defined, I become someone who wants an apple. If I want an, it's a silly example, but right, the shape and the form and the size and the measure and the quality and the nature of this ratzon lakabel literally therefore defines shir komaso shel kol netzal v'shel kol partzuf v'chol sfira. This is what defines everything. The ratzon lakabel is the thing that defines things. So on the level of spheres, let's say, chesed, what is chesed? Chesed is or elokus, which is not chesed, it's just or, but it's or elokus put into
disappeared.
Put into a kli called I want to be chesed. I desire chesed. That's what chesed is. There's a sphere called bina. A bina is just a hishtokukus to be bina. That's filled with or. Now, bina is different from chesed, or chachma is there, excuse me, bina is different from chachma, or chesed is different from gevura, because since the kli, the ratzon is I want to be chesed, the or that it receives is chesed, that or. So too with bina, so too with gevura, so too is, and so on and so forth. So too with dogs and cats. So too with partsufim, he says. All of these are just a function of their definition, their nature, their essence of what they are is just a function of the fact that they desire different things. They have a different medida.
A negative question, all right? Because the Tanuk depends on what those choices are, right? The level of Tanuk.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so let's say a person has the chisaron, he has the halal, but he doesn't get the Tanuk because he doesn't tie into the or. You see what I'm saying? That person can be miserable. So God wants us to be happy because he wants us to turn to him. But there's no guarantee that we will be happy if we don't. Right? Sorry, it's been in the back of my mind.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Well, let's say you don't seek out the light, you don't seek out the truth because you're lost or you haven't been exposed to whatever. It's very human to have the sense of lacking and the sense of desire and the emptiness.
Right.
And the joy that comes from filling it is phenomenal.
Right.
If it doesn't get filled, the Tanud becomes pain for those people, for us if we don't, right? I'm sorry. We're always talking about it in a positive way.
Okay. So part of that, yes, 100%, but part of that misalignment, right? At least what the Baal HaSulam is telling us is that there's perfect alignment between the Ratzon L'Kabel and the Ratzon L'Hashbos, the Ratzon Litain, right? So I think part of the phenomenon that you're describing is a tendency to not, you're desiring something other than meaning you're misaligning your Ratzon L'Kabel with the hashpah that's being offered to you.
I see a lot of people suffering, and I think this is,
Yes.
we do also, this is,
Right.
I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, for sure. This is why I think that like the Baal Shem Tov, for example, like the biggest and most important avodah is hishtavos. Hishtavos is really just a function of and really I think it is a proper kavana behind or in the bracha of Sha'asali Kol Tzarki. Sha'asali Kol Tzarki, the whole point I think is a reflection and meditation and an expression of everything I have is exactly what I need to do what it is that I'm supposed to do. And everything I need to do and everything I want to do is perfectly exactly based on what I have and nothing more and nothing less. Because if I want, if I'm given lemons, but I want apples, I'm going to be unhappy. So the question is like, I can want the things that are not being given to me, right? So my Ratzon L'Kabel, I'm not really connecting to my Ratzon L'Kabel, the things that are here for me right now. Which really, I think then, to put it in a different way, is really an expression of the idea of Ani Emloch and Yeshus, which is I know what I need. I know what's good for me. I want an apple. There's an orange sitting on the table. If there's an orange sitting on the table and there's no apple sitting on the table, Sha'asali called Sarkia, I have exactly what I need. I know better that I want an apple. Where does my desire for the apple come from? When I was a little boy, my mommy never gave me apples or whatever it happens to be that, right? But meaning it's I'm wanting something other than what I'm being given. There's either a chisar and emuna, or there's a sense of gaiva and yeshus that I know better about what it is that's good for me, but that's really just the same thing. And that creates the dissonance and that creates the dissatisfaction. And I'm not going to enjoy what I'm being given because it's not what I want. But the avoda, I think, is to really like actually tap into the ratzon to want what I have and have what I want, all at the same time. I think this also works hand in hand, by the way, with the idea that, I tend to be, how should I say it? I'm generally pretty much, I'm a pretty rational person, but I've seen like too many things to like really be like completely and totally rational. Like I'm not one to like believe in like Mofis stories all over the place. But I think there's enough to it that there are people who live in the reality of none of this is real, and everything just is manipulable because of that. Money, no money, food, no food, this food, that food. Uh, it doesn't matter because I experience whatever I want to be experiencing based on whatever is happening, and I don't need anything to be any other different to be experiencing the bliss that I desire, and that's a real thing. I mean, there are people who actually live that way, right? I mean, there are people who actually live that way, and so that's an align. I think that's a function of alignment between Ratzon L'Kabel and the hashpah that's being offered to you. And some people are getting more hashpah, and they have to align their Ratzon L'Kabel to that hashpah so that the hashpah doesn't destroy them, because it's miserable for them. Plenty of people who have more than everything, and they're miserable and terrible because the Ratzon L'Kabel isn't there, right? And then there are people who his Ratzon L'Kabel outpaces the hashpah because they want things that they don't have. That too is a misalignment and problematic. Okay. Okay. So Sharei. So he continues. He says Sharei hispashtus or ha'elyon min hamatzil he vadai b'li shir umida. The hispashtus or from Hakadosh Baruch Hu. This is limitless. It's or ein sof. It's just always being mashpia. Elarak hanetzal hu ha'osa shir ala shefa mikoach atzmo. It's the netzal that gives definition and limits to the shefa based on its own kalim. Mifasa yoso mekabel lo pachos lo yoser kfi shir chashko v'ratzon lekabel. You're only going to get what you want. You're only going to get what you genuinely truly desire to receive. Shazuhi emes hamida nohages beruchnias mishum she'ein ininak kfir noeg sham v'akol tolei beratzon. And this is how things work in ruchnias. So there's a different step when we start applying this to like materiality and physical things, but at least in pure spirituality, there where we also have this operation of Ratzon L'Kabel, Ratzon L'Hashbos, it's still playing out. He says the or is limitless, the or is undifferentiated, it's or Pashut Mamalik Kol Metzias. However, it's going to take on the shape and the form and the quality and the nature and the characteristics of whatever I'm looking for, whatever the makabel is looking to receive. Because there's no kafia when it comes to ruchnias. There's no compulsion when it comes to ruchnias. Ruchnias doesn't work by compulsion. As soon as there's compulsion, as soon as there's duress, as soon as you're shoving something down someone's throat, it's no longer ruchnias by definition. It's moving into a whole different plane of gachmius and materiality and chitzonius and yeshus, ego, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to pure spirituality, there is no such thing as forcing anything. Va'kol tali b'ratzon, everything is tali and ratzon. I can't give you more or, and I can't give you different or than the or that you want. All the or is there and available to you. You just, but you only get what you're looking for, and you only get what you're desiring, and you only get what you want, what you're wanting. Ulefichach, anu mechanes Ratzon L'Kabel hazeh shehu kli kabbalah shel hanetzal v'hu nivchan lebechinas hachomer shelo, and therefore this Ratzon L'Kabel is the thing that becomes the chomer and the framework for all netzalim. Shemachmasu yotze michlal matzi likra b'shem hanetzal, and it's this thing, this Ratzon L'Kabel, that becomes the thing that separates and causes us to call this thing a netzal and that the matzu. That the matzu, because it defines. That's what it does. It defines, it limits. By having a Ratzon L'Kabel, by having a hishtokukus with a particular character and a particular limitation and a particular nature, that by definition cabins and limits and hones and defines the limitless or that's floating out there. And that's what's distinguishing the netzal, which is or in a kli, but only this or that's in the kli, the or of dog or cat or apple or orange or me or you, that or and a kli is the netzal, as opposed to the or, which is going to be the matzil. Mitam hayoser mugdar b'min hachomer kazeh she'enu matzil b'matzil af mashu chas v'shom ki ratzon l'kabel enu noeg chas v'shom b'matzil b'hechlet sharei mimi yakabel v'hav. Okay, so that's what he says over here to explain a little bit more this idea, this concept of the ratzon l'kabel being the only necessary thing. It's there's a logic to it. It's not just a dogma. It's not just dogmatic. It's not a principle or axiomatic. There's a logic to it in the sense that because as soon as a Ratzon L'Kabel comes into existence, the Machshavas Habriya has now been fulfilled and reached its shlemus, because now all of the Shefa can be received with Tainug and Hana. By definition, nothing else needs to be done. Nothing else needs to be done. Nothing else new needs to be created. And because nothing else new needs to be created, right? Things only happen if there's a need for them. The need has disappeared. As soon as there's a Ratzon L'Kabel, the need for anything more disappears because the Machshava, the Tachlis, has now been fulfilled. The Tachlis of Chok HaTov L'Hetiv is now done. Once that happens, there's no need for any more movement within the Or Ein Sof, which is static and unmoving unless there's a prompt and a reason for it to change. And because it's nitzchi, right? It's nitzchi, it's eternal. That means it's unchanging unless there's a prompt and a reason for it to change. That reason has now disappeared with the creation of a Ratzon L'Kabel, or the reason has been fulfilled with the creation of a Ratzon L'Kabel. Everything else, therefore, is just godliness. It's just shefa directly, yashar from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? So that's where we're at. That's where we're at here at the end of paragraph 7. I'd hope to get through 8 and 9 also tonight, but we'll have to take those up next week. But he's going to now move on from this. Based on this, he's now going to explain. We started touching on it already, but he's going to explain now the hakira of, okay, what separates us from God? How does that work? Like a stone separated from a mountain, a chelek elokam imal. What is the thing that separates? Now we're going to have an understanding of what it is, the thing that separates. We understand the difference. We are Ratzon L'Kabel. God is Ratzon L'Hashbos without a Ratzon L'Kabel, so to speak. Okay, so to speak. We'll see much later on that that's also in and of itself not true, because there's room for us to be mashpia to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be makabel, because there was a machshava behind the bria and there was something that needed to be done. There's a desire, a ratzon lahashbos. That means that our receiving in turn offers something back, and that back is being received that wasn't there before, right? The chok hatov lehetiv wasn't being fulfilled. God, so to speak, is sitting on his hands and saying, I want to do good, I want to do good, I want to do good. Won't someone let me do good? And now we're here, and we receive the hashba, and we experience the tainug as a result of our ratzon l'kabel. That in and of itself actually goes backwards then, and create and fulfills an unstated ratzon l'kabel that also exists within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That will bring us full circle much later on and give us a sense of, oh, there's also a ratzon l'kabel there too, but it's no in very, very deep ways. Okay, in any case, paragraph 8 next time, 8 or 9 next time, Bezras Hashem. Have a fantastic week. Thank you for joining, and I will post.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.